With us today, we have two wonderful speakers joining us, John Peterson and Ethan Starr from the Missouri State Historic Preservation Office. Their presentation will showcase the benefits of the Certified Local Government Program for local communities, followed by an overview of funding opportunities for historic preservation. You'll be given ideas for best practices to operate and fund your historic preservation programs. Ethan recently joined the Missouri State Historic Preservation Office as an architectural historian, reviewing historic tax credit applications. He returned to his native Missouri from Central Virginia after having overseen a rural county historical society for 2 rewarding years. As an alum of Boston College and the University of Virginia, Ethan credits his initial place of employment, the Thomas Hart Benton Home State Historic Site in Kansas City, Missouri, for invigorating his interest in pursuing public history and preservation professionally. So, welcome, Ethan. Also, we have joining us John Peterson, the Certified Local Government Coordinator at the State Historic Preservation Office. He promotes local historic presentation by collaborating with local, state, and federal partners. John has worked for a variety of local, state, and federal agencies. He has a master's degree in anthropology from the University of Nebraska and education from Western Governors University. So welcome, both John and Ethan.
Great. Well, thank you and good afternoon. I think you're going to hear from me first, and then I'm going to turn things over to Ethan, and he'll be kind of our showstopper, our show ender. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. So. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll want to put this on present mode, though, John.
Yeah.
If you can go to the slideshow tab at the top.
Yeah, it looks like I'm going to have to start the slideshow and then share the screen because it's blocking me from. Oh, here we go. Okay. Okay, now I think we're good.
Excellent.
We use WebEx here at the State Historic Preservation Office, so Zoom's a little bit newer. So, well, we're going to talk about what State Historic Preservation Office can do for your communities. And let's see, we'll get started. The State Historic Preservation Office might not be the most exciting of topics that you've ever had in your Lunch and Learn, but I think there are some valuable things that SHPO can do for you. There's different functions the SHPO serves. This out of the way. So. And Ethan and I are just going to focus on a couple of them, the Certified Local Government Program and the Historic Tax Credit Program. But the State Historic Preservation Office is also the overseer of the National Register of Historic Places for the state of Missouri. It oversees inventory of archaeological and architectural resources around the state. It participates in Section 106 consultation, and just to be very brief on that, if you have a project in your community that involves federal funding and it's going to impact historic properties in your community, it might very well go through the 106 process to see what sort of effects your project might have on historic resources. Historic Preservation Fund grants is another important function of SHPO, and I wish we could get more into that today, but we won't. But the HPF grant program can provide your community with grant funding for various historic preservation projects in your community. And then we just provide general technical assistance to people around the state. The Certified Local Government Program, it began in 1980. The National Historic Preservation Act was amended to allow federal assistance to communities that would agree to abide by state and federal standards for historic preservation. These communities were then deemed certified local governments. I mentioned it started in 1980, but in 1985, the National Park Service now starts to provide money for participating in the CLG program. Then we see it really gets cranking. And by the end of 1986, Missouri has their first 7 CLGs. And you can see these communities here. And these communities are all still going very strong in the program. So here's a map showing all the certified local governments around the country. Both city and county governments can be CLGs. And right now, I think there's 2,100 certified local governments in the nation. Missouri is quite well represented. Missouri has 64. And any day now, we're expecting our 65th CLG. Higginsville has applied to be a CLG, and we're waiting for the National Park Service to concur on that, but we don't foresee any problems, so we're probably going to have 65 here very soon. Missouri's well represented. We rank 12th in number of CLGs. If you're curious, the state with the most certified local governments is Georgia. Georgia has 100. You can see here the program has grown over the years from 7 in 1986 to almost 65 today. You notice the photo of Walt Disney in the lower left corner. Our newest CLG, well, with the exception of Higginsville, but our second newest CLG is Marceline, the boyhood home of Walt Disney. And Marceline became a certified local government in spring of 2022. What benefits do you get by being a certified local government? Well, there's some direct benefits you get from the SHPO and the National Park Service. A big one is enhanced eligibility to receive grant money for historic preservation. You also get enhanced technical assistance from the State Historic Preservation Office. You're asked to directly participate in review of National Register nominations in your community. You kind of become a partner in local, state, and federal historic preservation. And I think this last one I highlighted in red might be the most important one. It's really kind of a time-tested, established framework for how a community can operate a historic preservation program. There's some more indirect benefits communities will get by participating in historic preservation. It's just a way for your community to identify those historical things, cultural, social things in your community that are important, that you feel are distinctive and represent your community. Historic preservation is a great way to foster civic pride too, and most people would agree it enhances the attractiveness of the city. Studies have shown it maintains and improves property values for historic properties. And it encourages businesses and residents to locate in your historic districts. We've seen with the Missouri Main Street program, a lot of communities are seeing some really good things happen in their historic downtowns. Just going to real briefly go over the requirements for becoming a certified local government. I know from the introduction, some of you already live in a CLG community, others do not. So just if you wanted some basic information, I'm going to go through this pretty fast. One big part about becoming a certified local government is your city or county would have to enact a historic preservation ordinance. The SHPO for free, no cost, will review your historic preservation ordinance, make sure that it doesn't conflict with the National Park Service requirements. And so that's something you can do if your community's looking at developing historic preservation ordinance. The first thing to do might be to contact us. Second, the communities are asked to establish a historic preservation commission composed of local residents who have an interest or experience in historic preservation. There's a few requirements for the commission. I'm just going to go through these, some of the more broad requirements. It needs to have at least 5 members. It's nice if you can find architects and archaeologists and architectural historians in your community to serve on the commission. Many communities don't have these people just floating around, but it's definitely a bonus to have people who have some experience in historic preservation. You're asked to hold at least 4 meetings a year. Each commission member is asked to attend at least one historic preservation training each year. And then there's some documentation that we ask you to send to us. What are the responsibilities of the Historic Preservation Commission? They oversee survey and inventory of historic resources in the community. If your preservation commission is going to be involved in design review of historic properties in your community, usually this involves a review of changes to the exterior facades of a given historic property, especially the street-facing facades. You very well might have that authority in your ordinance. And then the National Park Service asks that your commission review all new or amended National Register nominations that would happen in your community. The CLG program kind of recognizes that different communities are going to have different needs. You see, we have one photo here of Kansas City and one of Chillicothe. Obviously, the historic preservation needs of Kansas City are going to be different than Chillicothe. So there is some flexibility in the program, so communities can kind of tailor this to fit the needs of the community and the desires of members of the community. It's asked that the local government maintain some system for survey and inventory of historic properties in their community. The SHPO office actually can help you with grants to pay for architectural surveys of your historic resources. It's important that the public gets involved in your historic preservation program. So your ordinance and your Historic Preservation Commission and your program would need to have provisions in there so that residents can participate and you can listen to their input. I'm going to go over some best practices that are certified local governments practice. Some of these you probably already do. Some of these might be good ideas for you. If your community is just starting on a historic preservation program, you might find some of these useful as well. One is creating a preservation plan. These are very important. This helps to identify where your program is now, where you've been, where you hope to be, how far in the future do you hope to be at a given goal. It sets priorities for your community, identifies resources, and makes recommendations for how you can improve historic preservation in your community. And again, the Historic Preservation Fund grants that SHPO provides can provide funding so you can hire a consultant for your community to prepare a preservation plan. Set some simple goals for your community, yearly goals for things you'd like to see in your program. I've got 2 examples here from St. Joseph and Independence, and you can see these aren't detailed. This isn't a lengthy document. It's kind of a short bullet list of goals that your community would like to do during the given year. This really helps to keep things moving. I know St. Joseph, their Preservation Commission, at the end of each meeting, they just touch upon each of these goals and see where they're at. Participate in training. SHPO provides an annual CLG forum each year in Jefferson City. Coming up in June is the Missouri Preservation Conference, which is a great resource for historic preservation programs and ideas. You can create your own training. You can invite speakers such as SHPO staff to come and speak at your lunch and learn. That's a good way of doing training. One side effect of the pandemic is there's lots of webinars out there right now. So there's lots of places you can go for webinars. 2 sources I listed here. National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, they have a nice webinar series. and the National Trust for Historic Preservation, they do as well.
And John,
Sure.
I would just note that this year the Missouri Preservation Conference will be in September, uh,
Thanks
which
for
is highly
correcting.
unusual. They usually do middle of summer, but they wanted to do one in Eminence, Missouri, so they chose a time outside of the tourist season.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And I encourage you all to go to that. The National Park Service produces extensive information on historic preservation. The Secretary of Interior standards, which Ethan will touch on more, those are kind of required reading for running a preservation program in your community. National Park Service also has a series of preservation briefs that address everything from repairing historic windows to siding to tombstones, roofing. So I recommend checking those out. And all these things are available online, the National Park Service. Have a survey program in your community. I already mentioned SHPO can help you with funding for bringing in architectural historians to do surveys. And so I highly encourage you. You can't really have a good historic preservation program without knowing what's in your community and what you want to preserve. Design guidelines. These would help property owners to maintain the historic integrity of their properties. And then again, this would be something you'd get involved with your historic preservation commissions. And also, again, SHPO has grant funding to help with the preparation of design guidelines. Support your property owners. Provide information to residents, provide information to realtors. It's really important to educate your realtors about historic preservation in your community. Provide information to contractors and people who are going to be working on historic properties. A lot of our communities get a lot of PR by having a notable properties program or endangered properties program. And these are yearly lists of historic properties in your community that you can bring attention to. Cape Girardeau has an annual list of endangered properties, and they feel this has been a really useful program for them. It brings a lot of attention to endangered, threatened properties in their communities. Work with your local governments, communicate with your city council, especially communicate with your planning and zoning people, your planning and zoning commissions, communicate with your local media. It's important to stay involved with your local community, your governments. Reach out to your neighbors. It doesn't have to be your CLG neighbors. It can be just other neighbors that are working on historic preservation. You can exchange ideas. If you do trainings and have workshops, you can invite them to come to your town. Put everything online. This is where we all go for information now. So anything dealing with your historic preservation programs in your community, put these online. I know we live in a digital age, and of course you can put all of these things online too, but also have brochures, have flyers, have handouts for your residents, for people visiting your community, tourists. Sometimes tourists to your community later become residents. So have a lot of information available both online and in print format. Have public events. You very well probably already do a lot of these. People really enjoy historic walking tours. I like the event they have in Moberly every year, the Allen train robbery reenactment. Have host workshops. Excelsior Springs brings in contractors who work on historic properties, and they talk about things like repairing your siding, repairing your windows, so workshops, just any kind of programs you can do to bring attention. Missouri Main Street Connection is important for a lot of communities. A lot of communities see a lot of benefit by participating both in the Certified Local Government Program and in Missouri Main Street Connection. Many of you probably already are heavily involved in the Main Street program. They have an annual conference. It'll be in July this year in Kansas City. And if you're interested in Main Street program, I recommend looking into that. I went pretty fast, but I wanted to leave time for Ethan and also time for questions. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Ethan.
Thank you, John. I will share my screen here from the beginning. Okay. Hello again. My name is Ethan Starr. I'm an architectural historian and a member, as you can see, of the Architectural Preservation Services Unit of SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office. The function of my unit here is essentially to work as a cohort of technical experts to accomplish our various duties as an office, meaning that our group has a variety of experience, architects, historians, hands-on preservationists, and as you can see, we might dabble in all sorts of facets of our office, like those grant reviews, easements even. Our office holds some of those. Section 106 does federal reviews, but mostly what we're doing is the historic tax credit program, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. My unit, again, what I do for a job is reviewing all the federal and state historic tax credit applications according to the Interior's Secretary of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation. We'll get to those more in a moment. We consult with and educate applicants about how best to have a successful application, proposal, and finished project. And we conduct site visits throughout the state with applicants to these programs and their consultants. And that's what I guess I have here. Now, one thing to know about historic tax credit projects, or the historic tax credit programs, as I'll outline in a few moments, they're a program for rehabilitation. So as the National Park Service defines their 4 treatments of buildings, there's preservation, there's restoration, preservation being where you just don't do anything with the building, you leave it as is essentially. Restoration, meaning you bring every element, every material element back to its original condition, say. Rehabilitation, which I'll get to in a second, and replacement, when, say, a structure or a piece of a structure is gone and you have to put it back. Rehabilitation is somewhere in the middle of those. It's defined as the act or process of making possible a compatible use for a property through repair, alterations, and even additions, while preserving those portions or features that convey its historical, cultural, or architectural values. These are what we call character-defining features, the type of elements you'll see in any National Register nomination, if you're familiar with those, as in some way associated with or conveying significance to that building. Great. Okay. I'm sorry. Oh, yes. So I should mention the standards here. So the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation are a list of 10 principles for the treatment of historic buildings that deal specifically with rehabilitation there. So we're not judging you to the standard of restoration. We're or judging tax credit applicants rather. We are making those determinations based on what is a rehabilitation. Now, what buildings qualify for this tax credit incentive program run here out of our office? The first step in the application process for historic tax credits requires a given building or complex of buildings to be certified as a historic structure. This means a few things. Firstly, it must be in some way listed on the National Register of Historic Places. I think everyone has at least a general idea of what this program overseen by the National Park Service entails. It's essentially a national honor roll of historic buildings, documenting their historical significance and to some degree their architectural and material composition. As you see here, there are a few ways in which you can get on that national honor roll. Buildings can be individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places, or they can be located within a National Register district. And then there's something called certified local historic districts as well. Those were designated by the national parks in the 80s, not so much anymore. And they only exist in Missouri, in Kansas City and St. Louis. But here's a map of St. Louis. We have this. This is an interactive map on our website. And I have pulled up a little property you can see here with the black dot. We've looked up an address and we can see that this is in the McKinley-Fox district. And here it is. This is a rehabilitation project that utilized state and local, or sorry, federal and state historic tax credits to, as you can see, bring its appearance back to something befitting the historic character. Now, a couple other criterias here for establishing eligibility for participation in historic tax credit programs. The building must be listed in its nomination to the National Register as a contributing structure. So if you take a look at National Register districts in particular, many of them will include so-called non-contributing structures that, for whatever reason, are not understood as being connected with that district's historic character or significance. These buildings would not be eligible for tax credits unless that National Register nomination were to be changed, edited. Finally, a building deemed contributing to the historic character or significance of a National Register district or a property, they need to retain an adequate level of historic integrity in order to be deemed eligible for participation in these programs. So this is how we establish eligibility for participation in this incentive program. This is also the first step of the application process. An applicant will need to send us enough information for us to make this determination. So say a building had burned since it was nominated to the National Register a couple of decades ago even. We would work with our partners at the National Park Service to see whether it retains an adequate proportion of those character defining features. That is, materials, elements that connect the building to its source of historic significance. Okay, moving on to a lot of logos. It takes a big team to run each of these programs, the federal and state historic tax programs. And I'll have more to say about the partners themselves in a few moments. But first, these are the two different but very much linked programs, federal and state historic tax credits, which have between them some differences as well as similarities. It's important to note that they can be simultaneously pursued on the same project. In other words, the 20% federal historic tax credit program and the 25% state tax credits that you receive from this program can be stacked for a total of 45% of the associated expenses, QREs as we call them. One of the biggest difference between the two programs are additional qualifiers that we place on the state program, or sorry, additional eligibility. The federal program is only available for income producing properties, while the state tax credits are more open. They are also available for non-income producing properties, i.e. an owner-occupied residence, for example. And who cannot apply? Nonprofit and government entities are not eligible to receive historic tax credits. However, these these entities can be excellent candidates for some of our State Historic Preservation Office grants, again, by participation in the CLG program that really unlocks that for communities. John and I are not featuring many of these opportunities in our presentations, but if you have more community preservation oriented questions, feel free to ask as we finish up here. So you noted, you might have noted I had an acronym I didn't explain in that last slide, QRE. What are these qualified rehabilitation expenses from which you're able to determine those the value of those tax credits? Again, those tax credits are shown as percentages, and they're percentages of a total here that is your expenses associated with rehabilitation of the building. We have an overturned building right here because it's one good way to describe what we're thinking of when we talk about these QREs. They are expenditures relating to the building and its structural components. So components, the roof, the windows that are integral to the building itself, or actually architectural and engineering fees, other expenses that are, related to that construction work on the building. What is not a qualified rehabilitation expense is landscape feature, sidewalks, work that's done to a non-contributing structure or addition on the property. And that's about as in-depth as I'll get on that for now. Again, projects that don't qualify for the credits, structures, say something that's a structure and not a building that can't hold people, does not qualify. So we can't fund bridges or some of those other things, and we can't work with governmental entities either. Now, big picture, what is the purpose? When the National Historic Preservation Act was passed in 1966 and its subsequent amendments, what was the goal of say preservation incentives? Well, to encourage the protection, preservation, and continued use of our architectural resources. Yes, they've always been envisioned, I should say, tax credit programs as aiming toward dual goals of both preservation and economic development. So we are concerned with the overall economic well-being of the state of Missouri, for example. And we have the numbers to show here that we've had a lot of applications come through our office. That means a lot of buildings getting rehabilitated around the state, which is always great to see. We are one of the busier states in the nation, pretty consistently top 4, 5 among the entire US. Oh, and here are our partners. We partner with the National Park Service, as I've already mentioned, processing those federal tax credit applications, while Missouri Department of Economic Development is our primary partner for the state tax credit applications. Now is when it gets exciting. We start to see some examples of rehabilitation products across the state. I mentioned earlier that rehabilitation is the only one of the National Park Service's 4 treatments that allows those alterations or additions to a building. And boy, can these projects get complicated in a lot of cases. In the Globe and Democrat building seen here, this is the former newspaper headquarters in St. Louis, with a non-historic North Addition added in 3 stages from 1964 to 1978. This whole structure was transformed through the introduction of new windows and doors in a compatible manner to make this the new main entrance wing. And then the original 1930 building over here retained its historical integrity with few changes made. Now, the federal, I should note, and this was an application to the federal program, as you can imagine. It was an producing property. So those tax incentives were established in 1977. And again, a reminder, applications to the federal program must be income producing and depreciable. Another good thing to know is that when applying to the federal program, the building must be owned and operated by the same owner in an income producing capacity for the next 5 years after you finish up your project and get it certified with us. As for the Missouri Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program, this is a great example again because this is a private family home, and those are eligible for that state tax credit incentive program, but not the federal. It was established in 1997, and it does allow both income generating and non-income generating projects to participate. Now, this is a pretty cool house that Twelker Family Farm, and I'm sorry. And you can see we helped them remove, or the applicant removed additions here, non-historically compatible, and was able to use documentation to reproduce a porch on the front there. Okay. Now, we've already talked about the first half of the qualifiers for the federal historic tax credit, which is the one that's a little easier to talk about. For the state program, we generally take our cues from the federal. But the federal also has a threshold of investment. They call it a substantial rehabilitation test that ensures what the federal government is incentivizing here is a substantial investment of money. They want people doing big projects and essentially bringing buildings back from the dead sometimes. And then we did already note for the federal program, there is a 5-year recapture period, as they call it, where you need to have the same ownership. Oh yes, and we do strongly recommend that if you are considering participation in the program, consultant consultant, a tax attorney, professionals, ideally who've had experience working with these programs before. I mentioned there the substantial rehabilitation test. There is a formula here to ensure that you can, this is for the federal historic tax credit program, that your investment of money within a certain period of time, 2 years is the standard, you need to be over that threshold. So you can see it's not actually all that complicated if you have an income producing building. You just have to get together a few numbers and a simple math problem here. Now, this is my place to say, because we don't really work with people on the numbers for eligibility of their building, but we do often have early stage coordination meetings and consultation with potential applicants even before they submit something to our office. We are always happy to talk, to even visit, but usually over WebEx, over Zoom, a project and its applicants to talk about what is their path to getting access to these incentives. Now, again, here's the fun part, because there are even more pictures. Now, we're going to feature several rehabilitation projects across the state. Some of the most thrilling to see are, as you can see on the right here, 2 homes that have, the red house here was in St. Louis's Shaw's Garden Historic District. And then the bottom one here was a formerly abandoned farmhouse in Springfield. And I'll note the St. Louis one was also abandoned at one point. So this program in particular has a lot of capacity to bring buildings back from the dead, you could say. And then you can see here the Clark School over in St. Louis was, as we see from a lot of historic schools, rehabilitated into housing units. Note how some character defining features, as we would say, like the height of the corridors and those great tile walls were preserved, as well as inside the classroom here, big windows. Again, here is that house in Springfield. You can see before and after. And this is a very recent project with us. Here's a former water department building in the River Market in Kansas City, and rehabilitated according to the Secretary of the Interior standards. You might see what's in the back here and say, well, that doesn't look very historic, and you'd be correct. When someone is doing additions to a structure, the Secretary of the Interior standards, just to give you a sense for some of the things it states in principle, is that you don't want to create a false historic impression. You don't want to build an addition that might make a passerby believe it is just as old as the rest of the building. So those are principles from which we're able to extrapolate and apply to projects that come in front of us. Both federal and state historic preservation tax credits helped accomplish this project in St. Louis. Note that it is made up of multiple structures. I'm not sure if it's multiple units, but that garage was presumably listed as contributing in the National Register District as well. So they would be able to fix up those multiple structures at the same time. Here's the inside of that Springfield house. This is just another way to visualize how we ensure character-defining features in historic structure are retained. For example, you see the chimney breasts here. They are still very much visible, legible, and remain a defining feature of that room. And I will note there's more flexibility in kitchens and bathrooms because those are some very lived-in spaces nowadays that do not function as they used to. So we see a lot more tile and newer looking finishes for those rooms in particular. Okay, I'm going to finish up here with just a couple pieces of advice if you're looking to pursue a historic tax credit project. As John noted, there are a lot of resources you can find from the National Park Service. Again, they manage the federal program along with each of the states. So they have a great centralized resource, in their website where you can find, say, instructions for the application process, the preservation briefs, dozens of them about interpreting the Secretary of the Interior standards, but how it applies to specific building materials and elements, particular cases like historic storefronts or historic masonry that we run into a lot when you're in the field of rehabbing buildings. And then these are just a few notes on hiring a preservation consultant. I won't get into too much of this, but you can see we have a lot of thoughts on it. I will note that most applicants that come before our office have the assistance of a professional preservation consultant. That does not mean it is required. We also work with plenty of individuals who endeavor to do this on their own, but you should note that there are a cohort of individuals that make a living helping individuals and businesses to restore historic structures and navigating this application process. We cannot directly refer you to these people, even if we know some are more skilled at the process and better communicators, and some are not. We do encourage you to exercise due diligence, interview multiple consultants, say, and ask them about their past projects. But they should know the program if they are working on your behalf. And it's always great to establish contact with all the project stakeholders, including your SHPO reviewers, again, early in the process, maybe even before you apply. So tips for a successful project. We highly encourage you to plan ahead. This is not a swift process. It often takes, say, a year just for the application to move through. We have a review period if you submit an application of just about 30 days. But say if you're applying to the federal program, we have to forward that application for further review by the National Park Service. We encourage you to schedule consultations, even pre-consultations with us. Wait for signed approval from the State Historic Preservation Office before, or from the National Park Service if it's a federal program, before proceeding with actual work on the structure. And yeah, stick to the plan that you submit, because when you are submitting a definitive narrative as to the scope of work in your application and how it's set to proceed, that becomes sort of legally binding. So you want to be sure to describe accurately the planned work for a project. And with that, I will turn it over to questions from the group. For both of us, I presume.
Any questions?
I'll throw one. Okay. For the certified local governments, are there samples ordinances out there that we could look at? Because my city council might need samples just to get an idea. If
there's sure.
Yeah,
that's a great question. There sure are. If you go to the State Historic Preservation Office website, and I should have the link, but there's a link for the Certified Local Government Program. And if you go to that link, there's some links for 2 sample ordinances, one for zoning and one without zoning. You can also email me and I can email you those samples. I will say though, if you want to email me, I'm actually retiring on Friday, so you have like 48 hours to email me. But you can email Ethan, and Ethan can get those to you. So
okay. Thank
yes,
you.
maybe just email the 2 of us if you have a question about CLGs or the like.
And we'll get your email addresses someplace.
Yeah, I should have had those on the slide. I'll put those in the chat right now. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for our presenters today?
Okay, I'll throw another one. I have lots of questions. We have some really super old homes in our town that people are living in. Well, one they're not living in, but it was built pre-1900. Huge. I mean, this thing is massive, like almost 3 floors. And I'm watching it slowly deteriorate, porch falling off, things. Is there anything that I can say to these people and say, hey, these people can maybe help you a little bit if you're trying to put it all back together? I hate to see it deteriorated. I mean, it's like one of the earliest ones in our town.
Sure, I can take this question. I mean, it's good if you can to get in touch with the property owners themselves. And again, if historic tax credits are a consideration, it is very much important to know whether, say, they're an owner occupant or whether this property is owned and used as income producing, whether it's rented, say. That will affect the eligibility of that property for the respective tax credit programs. It's also great to be in contact with your municipal government, whoever, to know if they're a CLG, like John said, and if there is a preservation commission, they would certainly be great individuals to turn to for reference. And if there is design review, conducted by that Preservation Commission, then they would have direct input on that, is if it's in a local historic district, which I know is not the case for Steelville, but they could have direct input on the upkeep and redesign of that structure.
And is it true that they can't do any, if it's on historic register, which we only have one thing in the whole town, hopefully staying on the register. If they do any alterations to the exterior, does it have to, if it's rehabilitated, it could have changes, correct? Or
so again, rehabilitation, as it's defined by our office, by the National Parks Service, is a final product that adheres to those Secretary of the Interior standards. So something that is adequately preserving the historic integrity and character that, say, would give it significance for the National Register in the first place. So that's the goal as we see it, an end product that retains those features that would be mentioned in a National Register nomination. I would add also that even if you only have one thing on the National Register in town, it's always possible to expand from there. And on the topic of grants, which we didn't get to much today, our office does offer assistance for National Register nominations, but also the important precursor to that process, which is architectural survey of a neighborhood, of a community, of, say, a historic downtown, which will come back with determinations of what properties would be eligible for the National Register, and often historical context that can be very helpful to even enabling just you and me to try and write up that nomination to the register.
So I have a question. If there is a building in your town and you have a group of people that's interested in maybe purchasing the building and going through that rehabilitation process, in our case, it's a theater that they concreted over the stair or the seats, but it's just a almost a false floor. You could take the concrete out. That group should not form a 501c3 if they are interested in getting the tax credits, but they could get grants. Am I correct in that?
That sounds about correct. Yes.
Okay.
So that's an interesting dilemma. If you're approaching a historic property with what is the best mechanism for us to save this place, and if that's the goal, because private ownership does give you access, particularly, if you're looking at making it income producing, running it as a business, that gives you access to both the federal and state historic tax credit programs.
Gotcha.
Which, again, if you have tax liability to offload as a group, as an individual, that
helps.
could give you ample opportunity getting a 45%, stacked tax credit there. That said, a lot of community preservation efforts either have already or people do take the choice and say, let's do a 501c3 to solicit community donations, that kind of thing. Our office, grants from our office, grants from the National Park Service, from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, are quite often flowing to nonprofits. I will say, and I think John would say this about a nonprofit, say, looking for a grant from our office for preservation planning, say, we do not do construction grants, at least at the moment. If a nonprofit were to seek a grant from us, they would be wise to, in the case that their municipality was a certified local government, to make, say, a joint application with that municipality.
Okay. Thank you.
So kind of piggybacking off of that. So we are a group that operates under that 501c. we're better off if there was a private individual who owned that structure? Am I putting words in your mouth?
For the historic tax credit program, you're saying? Uh,
Yes.
So one of the complications I didn't go into because I don't like to go out there and confuse people, but it is important when we're talking about nonprofits, is that your ability to receive tax credits is diminished when nonprofits are involved in the process. The idea is to return, again, economic development, to return buildings to productive economic use. And so, say if a nonprofit is your tenant, or if you're participating, or if say you're participating in the federal program, and you live in your bed and breakfast, say, then the certain portion of your structure that is not for a economically productive use, that's not income producing, will be essentially subtracted from the total of tax credits you can receive. So it becomes complicated very quickly, but it is possible to do these programs with the involvement of a nonprofit, say as a tenant. It just diminishes your ability to receive that cash incentive.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ethan and John. I know we've gone just a little bit over at this point. If there are any burning questions, I'll take those, or we just have just a little brief information to share for everyone at the end also. So last call for any burning questions before we wrap up. And if not, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. And again, just some very brief information for us to share with you as we wrap up here today. I know that we did get to meet some of our board members at the beginning, but for those of you who do not know, our board members that are in your area, we've got those featured here. So Tanya Watson is our MCB president, Diana Huckstep, our MCB vice president, and Jeff Corman, our secretary. So, and again, we've included their locations if, that's helpful for you, in case some of them are in your area. You did meet Elaine today. Jennifer Whitson was also with us today, as well as myself. Elizabeth could not be here today, so she is generally with us, but for those of you who might be in Lynn or in that part of the area, she is also on our board. Our treasurer, Ron Hopkins, is pictured, and then we have some board members not pictured too. Brenna Bontrager, Emily Smith, Brett Dinkins, and John Robinson. So you did meet all of our 3 MCB team players, Cece, Kim, and Darla, so we're glad to have them here with us. And just a few more things before we wrap up today. I know that one of the things we've sure been working on with MCB is just the sustainability of the organization. So let's see, my screens are not advancing, so maybe I'll show you this and maybe not. Okay, well, at any rate, we do really appreciate you joining us today. And let's see, I may not be able to share any more of the slides, but we appreciate you joining us today. I did want to let you know, and that's one of the things I did not get to that we had coming up in the slides is our upcoming dates. So we're always on the 3rd Wednesday of the month, so don't hesitate to join us if you're interested. We know that we have an exciting group of folks coming forward. So again, thank you for joining us today, and we'll look forward. Oh, maybe I am progressing here.
Yeah, thank you. And I might add, SHPO had a booth at the MCB conference last year in Columbia, so you may very well see SHPO again at your next conference. So if you have more questions, want more information.
Okay, and it looks like I do have our slides moving now. I don't know if I was just stuck there for a minute, but you can stay in touch with us on our website. We have a brand new website we're very excited about, mocommunitybetterment.com. So don't hesitate to check that out. We also are on YouTube. So if you know someone who missed today and would like to find out more about this, this will be uploaded to YouTube as well as any of our past lunch and learns that we have facilitated. And of course, Facebook and Twitter are great ways to stay in touch with what's going on with MCB. We have a pretty active presence there. So again, next month, April 17th, and then you can see the dates for May and June as well. But we're very excited about the Lunch and Learn series and hope that you'll consider joining us again in the future. Again, we have been working on the sustainability of MCB and its mission and its support for communities. So if you're inspired by what you're able to be a part of today, you can always make a donation, whether that's $5 or $50 or $500 to the Missouri Community Betterment Better Together Fund. And as a nonprofit, you are eligible for tax donations. In this case, it could be up to a 50% deductibility. So if you want to check on that, you can see the website here. I'm sorry, the address. You can mail that here or to me as the MCB Endowment Committee Chair. And my phone number is listed as well. But if it's easier for you, we all love these QR codes. So if you've got a phone handy and want to scan that, that will take you directly to our fund. So again, thank you for joining us today. It's been great to have you here, and we'll look forward to seeing you hopefully all again next month.
Thank you, Paula.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And
Thank-
Jessica, I just wanted to note that I sent you an FAQ page from the IRS.
Yes, thank you. I just saw that. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Excellent.
Take care.
Well, we appreciate the invitation and hope it was a good presentation. Bye.
Thank you, Jessica.